subscriptions in the wake of its crackdowns against password sharing. Best Buy removes all physical media from its stores, and it's not far off from Target doing the same. Walmart is now the only major store chain actively still supporting the sale of 4K Blu-rays. How the hell did we get here? I'd argue that it goes all the way back to 1999, and that physical media would be in a much different place right now if it wasn't for the failures of the Super Audio CD. I know this is something that a lot of people are very divisive on, with some people calling this here format as the greatest audio format ever made, with other people calling it a laughable joke of a failure, and other people haven't even heard of this crazy, bizarre piece of music history. So, even if some people call it a commercial failure, after spending over half a year with this crazy format, I can't deny I've really fallen in love with it, and I feel like it really deserves a retrospective to celebrate almost 25 years of its production. Most importantly, I want to go through the triumphs, more importantly, the failures of the SACD, and how its failures are something that we're seeing be eerily repeated today. And you are for sure going to want to stick around to the very end as I compare an original 1999 SACD copy of Thriller to a standard 40-plus-year-old vinyl pressing. The results might shock you. So without more bullshit, let's do a quick history lesson before I can tell you my thoughts, opinions, show off my collection, and most importantly, tell you about my experiences with the Super Audio CD. Now, the Super Audio CD was created by Sony in 1999. They later collaborated with Philips to bring out the hybrid SACD format in 2002, but we'll talk about that later. The SACD was mainly created as a way for Sony to try to win back music consumers back into physical media after the wake of services like Napster let people pirate music like crazy. The incentive was to create a product so good with something that couldn't be recreated from a shitty MP3 file that it would drive people out of piracy to buy the physical product. And hey, that sounds like a great idea. A good fight is something I and many others very much appreciate. With the SACD, you could store even more music on one disc, take advantage of the growing home theater market by listening to albums in surround sound, and most importantly, the single defining characteristic of these discs, the DSD file format. DSD provides listeners with the highest resolution music you can ever hear off a digital disc. DSD contains the full dynamic range the human ear can hear and then some, and, well, a regular old CD is mastered in what we call the PCM file format, 16 bits at 44.1 kHz a second. DSD, 1 bit, almost 3,000 kHz a second. This brings DSD much closer to the realm of true analog compared to PCM. I think we all know the digital versus analog waveforms, right? How digital waveforms spike so much you need a digital to analog converter and everything just so you can hear PCM signals properly. Some people legit spend hundreds of dollars on digital to analog converters alone for their setups, chasing the best possible analog conversion for PCM. In contrast, the DSD waveform is so similar to analog, you can legit plug DSD straight into an analog amplifier and you'd be able to hear it. Correct me if I'm just spewing bullshit and I have no idea what I'm actually talking about, but I feel like why vinyl usually sounds so good is because the dynamic range is just so limited that it forces producers to master the albums well and quietly so you can actually hear everything, as mastering something too loud can cause distortion. The original CD was given a much bigger dynamic range than vinyl, leading to a lot of producers abusing this power instead of harnessing it, leading into something you might have heard before called the loudness wars, as producers rushed in to master their albums louder and louder and louder than the guy before him, because louder automatically means it sounds better, right? The SACD let people actually go back to the days of vinyl by bringing in engineers who actually cared about what they were working with and could use the SACD's increased dynamic range to its advantage, letting producers actually use it as a proper tool to, make something sound good. It's just such a cool idea being able to walk into a store, pick up an album, see the SACD logo, and then from there know that the album will be mastered with care. In 2002, Sony and lifelong rivals Philips teamed up to create the hybrid SACD disc. These just came on just beautiful gold discs, and they were dual layered. That means that they could be played on both regular CD and SACD players, with the idea to have people build up their collections and then one day be convinced enough to buy a player. It was such a popular practice that basically every SACD you'll find past 2002 should be a hybrid disc, which is just really good to see. Now, of course, the question must be asked. If this format was such a great idea, how come I've never heard of it? Well, the biggest, easiest explanation would just be bad timing and bad marketing, but it goes a little further than that. The easiest finger to point the blame on would just be the growing digital market, legitimate and pirated downloads both. You have to keep in mind one of the SACD's main goals was to win the hearts of the consumer, to give people a better product than what digital piracy could offer, and most simply just didn't care. Yeah, of course, you have older people potentially buying your product, those who truly care about audio quality, but who's really in control of the music industry? Obviously young people, and they will end up dictating if your product moves off the shelves or not. And younger people wanted away from all physical media, either pirating albums or buying them on iTunes. And I mean, can I really blame viewers like you for the death of the format? Kinda, but not really at the same time. Most people just don't care that much about audio quality. And even people who like physical media, like my parents for instance, would just say, the CD sounds good enough. And with less people buying, less albums come out. Or at the very least, albums come out that only appeal to your demographic and not much else, thus helping further kill the format as you don't get new people into it. Think of the top-selling albums of the 2000s, all being dominated by rap and pop classics. And seriously, no rap producers gave a fuck about the SACD, and most pop albums of that era were produced like shit anyways, so the SACD treatment would have just made matters worse. Thus, this comes in the next failure being availability. With dwindling sales, not enough money comes in to keep out churning so many releases. I mean, so many releases were planned to come out that were either delayed or just straight up cancelled. With this, stores have less availability of products, and will simply piss off stores and give their booths small amounts of shelf space. Or hell, even beyond that, I'm sure a lot of stores were just pissed off in general and didn't want to support the format to begin with. For something so big, you need huge amounts of marketing money, huge billboards and stands and store shelves, demo kiosks and big print ads for players, of which you probably rarely, if ever, saw back in the day. And probably the single biggest joke in the format's fall to grace would be a fucking format war. I'm not even joking. Toshiba, the same assholes who years later would start the HD DVD format war, created their own format known as DVD audio. Basically just because they didn't want to give royalties to a product owned by Sony, even though the amount of royalties would have just been the exact same from a regular CD to an SACD. Just 10 cents a disc. Just tons and tons of money and mass market confusion over 10 cents a disc. With this, most labels still supported the SACD as the better format, and the SACD would eventually outlive the DVD audio. But seriously, what a joke. I could seriously make a whole other video about just how much of a joke the DVD audio format is, how you need a separate player that wasn't a regular DVD video player to play them, which just confused even more people, how it was stupid to call it DVD audio so now it's forever aged, how the sound quality can barely even be considered comparable to DSD, still just using PCM, just in a higher resolution, just... what a joke. If I could rewrite history, all of the SACD would have needed was just DVD audio not existing, better marketing, and just have it compatible with so many more DVD players. For a lot of people, it's a pretty big investment all things considered to buy a new player, but bundling it in with a DVD player that they were going to buy anyways would have definitely alleviated most concerns. And yet, I think we all know what the real solution to the problem would have been. And well, it's pretty simple. In my opinion, all the SACD needed more than anything was, well, just support in the PS2. And a nice big sticker on the front of the console advertising that it played SACDs. I mean, it worked for the Blu-ray format war against the same enemy years later, putting the Blu-ray format into the hands of millions of consumers who just bought a new console. I mean, if you want to get technical, at least the PS3 could play SACDs, but even then, that was just in the original, backwards compatible models. And even then, I bet you didn't even know that it could do that until I just told you. Look, even though it's history, I still don't want to be too negative towards the SACD. Mainly because, well, it still isn't a dead format. That's right. Labels like Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab and Octave Records still churn out new releases, so just the fact that a small cult following exists at all for this format, even 25 years later, is just crazy to think about. So, you know what, whatever. Cheers to you, SACD, for holding on all these years. So, why don't we take a look back at some of the SACD's best releases before we get to the big reveal. 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral. Probably the quintessential SACD release, right up there with Dark Side of the Moon, in my opinion. I mean, if there's just one SACD that I think everyone has to listen to, it would have to be this one. Just a perfect showcase of everything the format is capable of. For starters, the music itself. This album just has so many effects going on all the time that it takes complete advantage of the SACD's increased frequency range, and the higher clarity makes everything sound so much more real. The SACD definitely succeeds at doing my favorite thing about analog, and that's bringing out things in the mix that I've never heard before from songs I've listened to countless times. And listening to the SACD really made me appreciate so much of what really actually goes on in this album. Highlights for me were definitely the voice reverberation on Heresy, the pounding bass on that same song, the chorus on Ruiner, the spoken word segments of the title track, and just the entirety of A Warm Place. But that's not all, as you get an entire bonus disc's worth of extra material, featuring all the B-sides and demos you could ever want. And even after that, you still get to listen to the whole main album in 5.1 surround sound. Being my first exposure to surround sound albums, it was really fun trying it out on the living room surround setup. Is it my preferred way to listen to the album? Maybe, maybe not. But it was super fun just to listen to one of my favorite albums in a whole new way. And it really does kind of suck that 5.1 didn't catch on in the recording industry the same way it did for movies. It really does a good job at immersing yourself as if you really were in the middle of it all, for an album that already does an amazing job of that in 2.0. I mean, if you have a 5.1 surround sound setup, and for whatever reason have not given surround albums a try, Downward Spiral is the one that's definitely worth checking out. If nothing more, you want a sick showcase for your surround setup that'll surely impress anyone. In conclusion, this is a great version of a great album that gives everything the SACD can give. Seriously, if every SACD was this good, there's no telling how much better the format could have done. And the best part about it is that you can still buy new copies of it, and used copies are dirt cheap. Why pay $40+ for the vinyl version when you can get the SACD for sometimes less than $20? And in a situation where the SACD gives you features you can't get on the vinyl, like the surround mix and the full bonus disc. That isn't a bad deal at all. Death Cab for Cutie, Transatlanticism. Now, I have to admit, I had never even heard of Death Cab before getting into this format. The only reason why I found this was because I wanted some modern albums at the time of their SACD release, and I really wanted to find some more rock albums. The cover and title just instantly tranced me, so I went on Apple Music and gave it a listen. I did not like the sound of this album at first. It was definitely just a little different from what I thought it would sound like looking at the cover. The thing that I just couldn't get used to at first was the singer. But a few months later, I went back to it and, well, it just clicked. I just understood it. and I just got sucked in and listened to the whole album in a single sitting. That same night, I went online and picked up the SACD. Very disappointingly, it's only a stereo disc, but knowing that this was captured in DSD from analog masters is so cool to see. Knowing that there were bands like Death Cab in the early 2000s that still deeply cared about their recording quality. So actually, how good is it? Well, listening to this disc for the first time made everything just fully click, and made me truly fall in love and just understand the format. The vinyl effect is 100% still here, as I listened in and heard stuff that I'd never heard before, most notably this really cool whooshing effect in the beginning of Lightness. Title and registration led me into a drum fill that truly surprised me in just how real it sounded, finally putting the words into my mouth that what the SACD is best at is creating a great sense of soundstage. And also, the disc was entirely worth it just for the title track, oh my god. So in conclusion, I can definitely recommend listening to this album if you haven't already. It very much surprised me and gave me something pretty different from what I usually listen to. I know some people are going to dismiss it the second I say the only way I can pretty much properly describe this album is, well, extremely depressing dad rock, but it does what it does very well, even for someone that's not hugely into dad rock. And hey, rumor has it that the DSD masters from this very disc is what was used in the transfer for the vinyl release. So if you'd rather have the source, go ahead with the SACD. But with this knowledge, it means there's no harm in buying the vinyl, kinda, knowing that it'll still sound pretty similar to the SACD. I got this for around half the price that the vinyl usually goes for, so I'm pretty happy. But just wait to find it on a good deal, as this disc is out of print, so scalpers can be assholes about this one every once in a while. And now look at some other great releases, although we're gonna go through these very, very fast because I'm running out of time. Alright, my first recommendation is going to be Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. 500,000 copies sold, the best-selling SACD of all time, which is seemingly very impressive and very not impressive at the same time, but regardless, classic album. In surround sound, I mean, if you want SACDs, that's like the one to get. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, another classic album, comes with a bonus track and 5.1 surround sound mix. What a great value. Next up, I'm going to shout out The Pretenders self-titled, less because I actually want you to buy this disc, and more because I want you to listen to this really, really great album. Next up, Elvis Costello, My Aim Is True. This is less of a recommendation for the disc, and more of a recommendation for the album itself, because it's a really, really, really good album. Now we're going to get into some absolutely insane bullshit. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name on this one, but it's that Piano Collection Volume 1. They put an anime/video game soundtrack on Super Audio CD. It's actually insane to me that they did that, but I want it, even though I don't even know what the fuck this is. If this doesn't surprise any of you, I don't know what will, but the Sopranos soundtrack, Peppers and Eggs, had a Super Audio CD release. I'm not even gonna try to comprehend how that even worked or what they did, what kind of magic they pulled off to make it sound good, because if I go on reviews of this thing, and people legit say it's like the best sounding disc in their collection, and I can't tell if they're being ironic or not. Last up, the disc that more than anything in the whole world, I need to get this disc in my collection, Ludacris's Chicken and Beer. You know how I said no rap producers cared about the SACD? Well, turns out I guess I was lying, because a Ludacris album came out on this format, and not just any disc, a surround sound disc. So yes, I really do need it. Is it way too expensive and out of print? Yes it is. But I'm just, hopefully I can find one for a decent price eventually one of these days, because I want it so bad. We're finally here for Chapter 4. Analog mastered vinyl records versus DSD mastered Super Audio CDs. And can one format be objectively called the best? Here's the proof that I do in fact own the genuine article, SACD and DSD logo. I don't own the slipcover, sadly, but what does a slipcover matter when what really matters is the truth? And here it is. One of the big reasons why I wanted to get into this format in the first place was Mainly just because there's not a lot of resources or forum posts or discussions that actually compare the Super Audio CD to vinyl. Is it a better format or not? Blah, blah, blah. And you think there would be a lot more discussions when the whole main point of DSD is to be vinyl-like, to be the most vinyl-like thing available. Yet you don't see a lot of people actually compare it to vinyl. And I think I know why. Not because SACD is inherently worse than vinyl, but because it's just so hard to compare these two formats that are so very, very different and in their whole other leagues. The main thing comes to the fact that, well, I just kind of come to the conclusion. Through everything, I feel like what's most important, more than anything, is of course how the record was actually mastered. That's very obvious. How the record was actually mastered is going to determine how good it's going to sound on each format. It doesn't inherently mean that one format could sound the best, because how the album is mastered per each format could determine how good it's going to sound. You can have an absolutely gimped CD that just had no care put into it, but then an analog mastered vinyl of the same album. So of course the vinyl is going to be better than CD. Does that inherently mean that the vinyl format is better than the CD format? No, not entirely. I have some CD albums that sound way better than their vinyl counterparts, despite being seemingly analog recordings. Thriller is just such a weird occasion because, well, this is an album that has just so much care put into it in both of these versions that they just both sound incredible. It's honestly really, really hard for me to rank both of them and to say that one is better, but that's what we do on this show. I'm the ranking master. I'm the ranking king. I'm supposed to be the one to rank everything. So how can I compare these two? How can I say that one can be put up on top? And, well, this is an original 1982. I don't know if it's a first pressing or not. It's one of the very early pressings of this album. So this is an early pressing of an album. So you have the analog master tape, then taken to a pressed down from like a secondary source, or whatever. The pressed version is what we call a secondary source. And then from the secondary source, we have this vinyl, which was pressed from that. From this Super Audio CD, it's a direct flat transfer from the original master tapes. In fact, this was actually engineered by Bernie Grundman, who engineered the original vinyl version. So of course these sound very, very similar if it's the same guy who worked on both of these. So of course with something like this that was taken directly from the master tapes, I automatically assumed that, oh, this is going to sound way better than the vinyl if it's taken directly from the master tapes instead of a vinyl that's 3 generations down from the actual tape. So I thought, it was going to have an effect to a lot of other vinyl records I have, to even the other Super Audio CDs, where it's going to do the vinyl effect. I'm going to actually hear new things that I haven't heard before in the mix. And that moment didn't really click for me. There was never really a lot of times where I went, aha, oh, I've never heard that before. Oh, wow, this is really cool. Just because there's not a lot of effects that actually go on in this album a lot of the time. It's more about the groove, it's more about the feeling. There's not, so a lot of the tracks aren't too complicated, which made it really hard for me to compare. It didn't make it seem like, oh, I was actually going to hear a lot more into this. The only thing that for me was actually really, really cool to hear is that if you put on Billie Jean, it might be on some of the other tracks, but the one that I actually noticed it on was listen to Billie Jean on headphones, turn it all the way up, the beginning little bass part. You can actually hear some of the hiss from the actual recording master tape. You can hear a very small, faint amount of hiss from that. That's the only cool thing that I really heard from this. So because of that, it kind of took me a little bit to appreciate this. I almost was almost a little disappointed at the Super Audio CD for a little bit because, well, oh, I didn't hear anything new. Oh, this sounds just like the vinyl. But then after a minute, it took me to realize, well, shouldn't that be a compliment? Should I actually be taking a step back and realizing, wait a minute, this sounds as good as the vinyl. Nothing more, nothing less, but wait a minute, I have something here that's actually comparable to this. So I felt like I had to wrap my brain around this. I felt like I had to listen to an inferior version of this album to kind of try to make a way to appreciate these more. I had two options. Number one was my phone streaming, and it didn't sound the worst, but it has this terrible effect that maybe it's just a thing with my phone, maybe it's just a thing with the streaming, I don't know why, but it just created this terrible, like, curtain effect where it feels like everything's muffled. It feels like there's a curtain just above everything, like you're just hearing everything from like another room back. I'm sure you guys, if you guys have had speaker setups, you felt this before in a recording, but it just didn't sound perfect. It didn't sound as good as these. And it didn't take me till I listened to this, the Michael Jackson #1 CD, that I actually began to appreciate the Super Audio CD. Listening to Billie Jean, mainly, I just listened to a minute of Billie Jean. I couldn't even get that far into the CD, just because, well, the bass is so insanely cranked up on this CD, it's like not even funny. There's literally 100% nothing but bass. You can barely hear Michael singing, and it's not even like good bass. It's not even like really good, like tangible bass. The bass is like all shaky, and you can't even like hear all the notes properly. It's just so it sounded freaking terrible. So, and I really can't knock on this CD for having such pumped bass, because obviously this CD wasn't meant to be played on an audiophile setup. This was made to be played in the car stereo or a tiny little CD speaker setup, which is what my sister uses for. I mean, we've had this in our family for like forever, and I'm pretty sure this was in our old car at one point. So yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you get it. So at the end of the day, does this mean that DSD masters of analog recordings sound better than their analog counterparts? I really can't say for sure, but again, it all depends on the mastering, and I feel like most vinyl albums are going to be mastered better. Of course, you're going to try to ask me at gunpoint, you know what I mean, which one of these do I actually like more? If I was held at gunpoint, I'm going to take the vinyl just because the artwork is bigger, and just because, you know, I've listened to this album so many times on this vinyl. Again, this is my, like, signature test record that I test, like, all my equipment on. So I'm just kind of very used to the sound of the vinyl. Doesn't mean the SACD doesn't sound great, because it does. But I'm just so used to it that, honestly, I feel like you know, at a certain point, it becomes a bit of a morality question on, yes, this was the version that the engineers heard back in the studio, but what version were we actually meant to hear as consumers? My eyes, well, it wasn't this version. This was the version that Michael gave his stamp of approval on. I mean, this was the version that we were meant to hear. So, I don't know. It just sounds a little, I don't know how to describe it. I feel like just like hearing the vinyl crackle a bit of the surface noise makes it a little nicer. And I feel like, you know, how SACD has like unlimited just mounds of dynamic range, whereas vinyl is very crunched and pushed through. I feel like maybe that helps this album a little bit, because I feel like when you crunch the dynamic range, it kind of has to force everything to come out of the speakers a little bit more. So I feel like this one, I feel a little more groovy with this one. This one's more if I want to actually like sit back and like hear every note and like hear everything, and things a lot nicer. But if I just want to groove, I feel like this is a better album version to groove with. But they're both really, really, really great versions. And, you know, again, I didn't need this to beat the vinyl. I just wanted it to put up a fight, and it definitely put up a really, really, really good fight. But honestly, let me know in the comments if you own any SACDs of 80s albums or analog mastered recordings, and could you tell me if they actually sound better than their vinyl counterparts? Maybe an album that has like more effects going on that could actually take advantage of the SACD format. I don't feel like Thriller really needs the SACD format the same way that something like Nine Inch Nails does. Nine Inch Nails definitely benefits from the advantages of the SACD. Thriller doesn't really need that, other than just having a really, really good flat transfer of the master tapes. Again, DSD at the very end, the file format, not the Super Audio CD. I mean, when you look back on why DSD was created in the first place, it was meant as a recording tool. It was meant as a way to faithfully capture analog recordings the best way possible. And then from there, it was found out that, oh, we can actually record really, really good digital stuff with this. But the very beginning point was, can we faithfully recreate analog sounds and restore analog recordings in digital and just keep them there forever? And I feel like something like this album succeeds at that. And I can say that the DSD file format in some ways did succeed. Is it going to be better than vinyl? At the end of the day, no. The SACD is not my favorite format. It can never beat out vinyl. You can never replace vinyl. The actual physical disc spinning on your turntable. It's just, you can't ever beat that. But vinyl won't exist forever. I mean, like, this record, I'm honestly, you know, even though there's a lot of copies of this album, I feel like I can almost start to hear a bit of degradation on Billie Jean just from spinning it so many times, me or the previous owner or whoever had it. So, from a preservation standpoint, looking on years and years and years into the future, this is going to be the best version, the best digital version of this album that we'll ever have. And looking from that, I'm good with this. Like, if vinyl goes away forever, and, you know, I have to eventually sell all my vinyl, or my vinyl copy deteriorates, or some nuclear magic happens where every piece of vinyl in the universe just gets snapped away, I can live with this. So we finally come to the end of the video, and the question has to be asked if I can actually recommend you go out and get a Super Audio CD player yourself, and, well, I don't know. It really is hard to say, just because, well, at the end of the day, the Super Audio CD and DSD was a failure. Despite being so great, DSD failed to capture the recording industry, as pretty much every digital studio will record in PCM, even though that just pains me, because the proof is right here that both analog remasters and digital recordings can sound so much better if you record in PCM. And, well, is there a chance for PCM or the SACD returning? Well, there might actually be, as the founder of PS Audio, Paul McGowan, is very, very, very adamant about how much he loves DSD, and how apparently he wants to create new file editing software tools to make it way, way, way more easier for a lot of studios to get into DSD and start recording in DSD, which seems really, really great for people like me who would actually love to record in DSD. Looking right now on eBay, the cheapest DSD recorder would cost me around, what, like $250? At the very least, SACD players aren't too expensive. This one right here that I have is the Samsung DVD HD 841, and it only cost me around 35 bucks. And I don't know, I feel like just because this 9 Inch Nails disc is so cheap that if you have a 5.1 surround sound setup, it's honestly maybe worth it entirely just to get an SACD player, just for this disc if you like 9 Inch Nails. And in fact, you might actually already be able to play it. As I've already said, backwards compatible PS3s can play SACDs, and a lot of Sony 4K Blu-ray players can play SACDs. In fact, the Sony 4K Blu-ray player that I both have at my house and the one that they're selling at my local Walmart right now can play Super Audio CDs. The fact that you can walk into a store like Walmart and get a Super Audio CD player in 2024 kind of shows that there still is some love for the format. At the very least, the vinyl resurgence is starting to give us a lot more producers that care about audio quality, but I still feel like we're a long ways away, as a lot of vinyl records I can still very obviously tell are pretty much just a CD being transported into analog, even if there are a lot of really good sounding analog recordings out there in vinyl these days. If anything, I hope this video at least inspired some of you to start to appreciate high-resolution audio more and to start paying more attention to it. And I really hope that this video can start a discussion into high-res audio and why it is kind of so important. But At the very least, next month, we should be coming in with a every Arizona flavor tier list, so stay tuned for that. The podcast should be starting up again shortly with its 4th season. Oh my god, it's been so long since we started it. But, yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one.